close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus, this my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is over, times for me won't be no more. Guide me safely, take me on to thy kingdom shore, to thy shore. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is mine. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. To the chorus again. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus, if you please. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Love lifted me. I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry, from the waters lifted me. Now say, am I? Let me tell you that love lifted me. Love lifted me when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. Love lifted me. Love lifted me when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. Souls in danger, look above. Jesus completely saved. He will lift you by his love out of the angry waves. He's the master of the sea, builds his will obey. He's your Savior, wants to be saved today. Let me tell you that love lifted me. Love lifted me when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. Love lifted me. Love lifted me when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. And we'll do the special music now. We don't really have a program to follow, so here we go. When troubles surround us, when evils come, the body grows weak, and the spirit grows numb.
Spirit grows numb.
When he thinks beset us, he does doesn't forget us. God sends down his love,
sends down his love
on the wings of a dove,
wings of a dove,
on the wings of a
snow white dove. He sends his pure, sweet love,
signs from above,
signs from above,
on the wings of a dove,
wings of a dove.
When Noah had drifted on the flood many days, he searched for land,
He searched for land
in various ways,
various ways.
Now troubles he had some, but he wasn't forgotten. God sent down his love,
Sent down his love,
on the wings of a dove,
wings of a dove,
on the wings of a
snow white dove.
He sends his
Pure, sweet love,
signs from above,
signs from above,
on the wings of a dove,
wings of a dove,
on the wings of a
snow white dove.
He sends his
Pure, sweet love,
signs from above,
signs from above,
on the wings of a dove,
wings of a dove.
Good morning, everybody. Are you happy to be here today? How many of you are enjoying this blessing? Raise your hand. Yesterday I was blessed, and I was sharing the blessing with other people, and I was texting and sharing the link. You know that this is going live, and I was sharing the link with so many people, and they are happy to be able to benefit from this already. So, how many of you believe that Jesus is with us here today? So let's pray together, maybe a group of twos and threes, and ask God to bless us, that the presentation that we are about to listen will benefit you, will benefit your family, and your local congregation as well. Okay? And after this prayer, we will have Dr. Can you remind me his name? You know him already. Nedley, and we are happy to listen to his presentations. And yesterday, I was taking some notes, and he said, it is our thoughts what change our emotions. Also, atheism leads to mental illness. How many of you are happy to have Jesus in your lives? Amen. 10 Commandments are about enhancing mental health. Praise the Lord for that. So let's pray together, and then we will welcome Dr. Nedley, and we will enjoy this presentation. At the same time, if you have the link, you can share. You can go to the Indiana conference, and you will see that the transmission is going on. You can share with your friends and family so they can benefit from this live program. Let's pray together. Group of twos and threes, please. Dr. Nedley's presentation now will be Enhancing Emotional Intelligence Part 2. And don't forget that we will meet here at 2:15 this afternoon, and his presentation will be How to Recover from Various Forms of Anxiety. Dr. Nedley, welcome. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Testing? Testing. All right, good. Well, Emotional Intelligence Part 2 is actually improving the emotional health of children and adolescents. I think you can see the title up there on the screen. And the big question is, can we actually do that? And it stands to reason that if emotional intelligence is learned rather than inherited, that we can do that. In fact, that's why we send our kids to school, is to learn. And they're learning math, they're learning English, they're learning science, they're learning social studies. Those classes are given every year. But by the time they get through the 12th grade, they have learned virtually nothing about their emotions or mental health. And that needs to change. In fact, part of emotional intelligence that we talked about yesterday is being able to manage your emotions. People with low emotional intelligence are managed by their emotions. Day by day, moment by moment, they are being managed by their emotions. People with high emotional intelligence still have powerful emotions, but the difference is they're managing those emotions. And you can't have self-control unless you're able to manage your emotions. And studies show children can actually develop self-control. When they do, they're more popular with other children. They score higher on SAT scores 10 years later. In fact, that is the #1 prediction of how well your SAT score is going to be at age 16, is how much self-control you had at age 6. That makes the first 5 or 6 years of training of our children extremely important. Are they able to delay gratification by age 6? Displaying self-control by age 11 is highly correlated with successful employment throughout participants' lives. If they're able to control themselves and manage their emotions at age 11, they are going to have far more successful employment. Participants with low self-control experience 3 times as many months of being unemployed over 22 years when compared with those with high self-control. And this was published in the journal Psychological Science. Well, as we mentioned yesterday, increasing emotional intelligence can prevent a lot of different mental illnesses. We mentioned some of them yesterday, but we didn't mention this. Violence is on the increase in our society. The murder rates last year, according to the CDC, rose more from one year to the next than ever recorded in national history. Violence against family and others is also on the increase. And this is something that can be prevented by improving emotional intelligence. It can also effectively prevent or treat mental health problems as a result of relationship breakups. So many suicides of young people are related to this aspect. They have a relationship, it's very important to them, good boyfriend or girlfriend they think, and then a breakup occurs and they can't tolerate it and they think life is not worth living. But that's an emotional intelligence issue. Let's look at some of the facts about mental disorders in the U.S. in children. The 4 most commonly diagnosed mental disorders are ADHD, anxiety, behavior problems, and depression. If we take a look at children aged 3 to 17 and look at a 4-year period, this was the 4-year period prior to COVID. You might wonder why I'm not mentioning the periods during or after COVID, and that's because the CDC has not published that data yet. And by the way, do you think that data might be worse? Yeah, the preliminary information shows that it's going to be significantly worse. But let's look at it how it was pre-pandemic. 9.8% of children had been diagnosed with ADHD. That's 6 million children in the United States. 9.4% of them had already been diagnosed with anxiety. 8.9% had already been diagnosed with behavior problems. And 4.4% had been diagnosed with depression. And these statistics are worsening over time. Notice this quote, ever having been diagnosed with either anxiety or depression among children ages 6 to 17, so that's essentially your K through 12 grades, increased from 5.4% in 2003 to 8% in 2007, 8.4% in 2011 to 2012. But at age 12 to 17, the year prior to COVID, 15.1% had major depression. 36% had persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. So that's over a third of our teenagers in America, persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. 4% of them already had a substance use disorder. 1.6% had an alcohol use disorder in their teenage years. 3.2% had an illicit drug use disorder. 18.8% seriously considered attempting suicide in just 1 year prior to COVID. That's almost 1 out of 5 teenagers seriously contemplating on taking their own life. 15% had actually, 15.7%, almost 16%, had actually made a suicide plan. They went that far and said, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to end my life. And 8.9%, almost 1 in 10 of our teenagers attempted suicide the year before the pandemic. 2.5% made a suicide attempt actually requiring medical treatment. So in other words, they injured themselves so badly that they ended up in the emergency room and they had to be admitted to the hospital as a result of their suicide attempt. This is serious. We have got a significant mental health issue in our country, and it is an epidemic in regards to our children. And if you go to any emergency room today, you will see people in this age group, in the K through 12 age group, being held in an emergency room waiting for a bed in a psychiatric hospital. And the problem is there's no beds available, and so they might have to stay there for 3 days being drugged by the ER doc until they actually are able to be committed to a psychiatric hospital. Mental, behavioral, and developmental disorders begin, however, in early childhood. 1 in 6 U.S. children aged 2 to 8 had a diagnosed mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. That's 17.4. Diagnosis of ADHD, anxiety, and depression become more common with increased age, however. So if you take a look at that, and I think that's the only screen you can see, so I'm just going to walk over and show you the bar graph here. Notice depression, age 3 to 5, virtually unknown in our children age 3 to 5. Why is there no depression prior to 5 in our young people? Well, it's not no worries, because we're going to see that anxiety actually is there. So they are having worries, but they're not depressed. The reason why they're not depressed is you actually have to have a frontal lobe to experience depression. And their frontal lobe is not developed enough. This is why, for instance, animals, no animal, no matter how bad their life is, and they might have just gotten run over and they're still alive in their extreme pain, no animal will ever attempt to take their own life. Why do they not do that? Because they don't have the frontal lobe ability to reflect upon themselves. But age 6, that's when the age of accountability starts. You have that ability to reflect upon yourself. And as you start reflecting upon yourself, you can get depressed and even develop a suicide plan at age 6. So we start seeing suicidality in our young people by the time they're K or kindergarten or first grade. So notice in 6 to 11 it goes up significantly. After 12, the frontal lobe continues to develop more. And if things are not going well in the life, or there's a perception of that, you can see how depression tends to skyrocket among the 12 and older age group. But anxiety, you can have anxiety at age 3 to 5. And of course, you probably run into animals that have anxiety. I heard about one yesterday from a participant here who was asking me what to do with her cat who wants out of the house and then wants back into the house all the time. And I said that cat needs to go to a cat anxiety recovery program. But anxiety can occur in our young children, but it's higher at age 6 to 11, and notice at age 12 to 17 it goes up even higher. So which is actually higher, anxiety or depression in our young people? Anxiety is actually higher. We'll talk about that. And then behavioral disorders. Obviously, behavioral disorders can occur in children under the age of 5, but then they tend to skyrocket at age 6 to 11, and then they're a little bit less once you get to your teenage years. So again, this is the data pre-COVID. But when we took a look at the data all the way back down to 2003. When did mental illness begin to skyrocket exponentially in this country? Does anyone know what the year was when it started to go up dramatically? The answer is 2012. So what was it that happened in 2012? That's when half of Americans owned a smartphone. And in every country of the world, when half of the citizens own a smartphone, rates of depression and anxiety skyrocket in that country. I was in Kenya in 2019. Kenya had virtually no rates of depression and anxiety. Suicide was almost unheard of in Kenya, a much poorer country than America, but the people there are happy, generally. But in 2019, they started to have significantly high rates of depression and anxiety. Their suicide rate started to go up, and they even had a headline in the Kenyan national newspaper about the mental illness occurring in Kenya on one headline of the national news, and then the very front page the next day said, "Shock, linked to smartphones. Half of Kenyans now own a smartphone." And since that has occurred everywhere, the question is, why is there such a link? By the way, what has happened since 2012? It's gone up even further since that time. And why is the pandemic so much associated with worsening mental health? There were actually two pandemics in 2020 to 2022, one that the news media focused in on, which was COVID. But there was another pandemic that was occurring that, according to Gallup poll, affected people even more so than COVID. And that was the mental illness pandemic. People were told, including children, to stay home from school, too dangerous to be out there, and they had to get their education how? Online. Now, here's what happens when, and it's not like our children are just doing bad and terrible things on their phones. But you can understand a little bit. In fact, studies show when kids go online to get educated or to do their homework, because sometimes they're told you have to go online and do this research and do your homework. Okay, I'll go online and do it. Studies show they have a full desire to get that homework done in the length of time that they think it might take, but within 3 minutes, they're no longer doing their homework. Why are they not doing their homework? They got distracted. And, they get online, and all of a sudden they realize someone has tried to text or chat with me here, and I didn't realize that till I got online here. But I'll just go ahead and answer this text. Then they start to do their homework, and then the engineers know that they're online and know that this particular kid likes BMWs. And so a BMW starts to float across the screen, and there's a BMW at the local dealer. Maybe your dad would like to get that. And so, I can tell Dad about this. And so they click on it, and they say it won't hurt to take a few minutes and learn about this BMW. And as they're learning about this BMW, then a push notification comes in. Donald Trump got handcuffed in New York City and is in a New York City jail. And so, wow, I've got to learn about this. And so they click on that, and then they're reading about this, and then another chat comes in from another person. Actually, this time it's a Snapchat, and if you don't look at it right away, you're going to lose that picture. And so you've got to see that picture, and so you click on that, and then after you're through with that, you're thinking, now why did I get on this to begin with? Now, it sounds innocent enough. Nothing bad has really occurred to this child as they're on the internet. But the problem with this is the area of our brain that requires focused attention is identical to the area of our brain that we use for managing distressing emotions. So if our children can't build up this anterior cingulate gyrus of the frontal lobe, that's the portion of the brain that is needed for focused attention, they won't be able to manage distressing emotions. And so it's the distractibility element. This is what a lot of people, weren't necessarily concerned about when smartphones first came about. In fact, I didn't recognize it myself. I thought, this will probably be better than Hollywood movies. We know Hollywood movies are also not good for the brain. We can go into the rapid scene of reference change, the frontal lobe suppression, all of the issues that Hollywood movies cause. And I thought at least they'll be able to interact. They're not going to be like vegetables. But it turns out the interaction and how the engineers have developed it is your brain is being constantly distracted. And that's because the brain is not only a thinking system, it's a monitoring system. And we are prone to those distracting elements. Now, here's what happens when you don't ever have to focus for 40 or 50 minutes. And during the COVID pandemic, they were online with their teachers, but they could hear them in the background, but they were getting distracted continually through that whole COVID pandemic. I'll just tell you what someone that works for our organization told me the other day. This is just kind of an example. But we had released a video several years ago about some of the genetic causes of depression and anxiety. And it was probably, a 10-minute video. My son interviewed me, Nathan, on Let's Talk Mental Health. And so we uploaded that. But someone recently decided to look at that video and saw a 1-minute and 50-second segment that had to do with premenstrual dysphoria. That is a genetic condition, often due to a metal metabolism disorder that can be corrected through supplements. And so he thought, well, that's interesting. I'll put a 1-minute and 50-second, just that segment up there. And within a few days, we had 100,000 hits, where the first video had only several thousand, less than 10,000. Same video, but why was it more attractive? Because if it's longer than 2 minutes, the typical person who doesn't have this area of their brain thinks, there's no way I can sit through 8 minutes and listen to this and be able to pay attention. But 2 minutes, I think I can do that. And then they were forwarding it to others and all of that, and I was just kind of surprised. Actually, the 8-minute video is better than the 2-minute video. But still, this is where our children are at. And if there's something that's kind of deep where they really need to understand a lot of the intricacies, it might take 50 minutes to explain something. It might take 60 minutes. But they're incapable of doing that. And so what happens when the brain continually gets distracted? This area of the frontal lobe, when it's not being used, starts to prune itself and shrink down. And we'll actually see it on the MRI scans. The MRI scans of the brain will show a shrunken anterior cingulate gyrus. And this is a serious condition, and it actually requires, fortunately, it can be reversed, but it has to be reversed by getting rid of all of these distractions and having the individual work on focused attention for long periods of time. Now, actually, their mental health would be far better by not having any devices, no distracting element, and just going out and working in a field. You know, Abe Lincoln, by the time he was 8, he was working hours every day out in a cornfield not too far away from here in Illinois. And he was putting in full-time days working out there. Now, there might be a distraction of a bee coming around or something. And so, you have to, concern yourself with that bee for a little bit, but then you go right back to work, and it's hours at a time. And so it's far better. This is one of the reasons why we're told that agriculture is one of the ABCs of education. And this is critically important, actually, to be able to help our brains develop normally with a good focus of attention. Now, of course, it gets worse when they start getting into bad elements of the internet, which very often happens because that's available to virtually everybody, no matter what their age is. So eventually they're going to get distracted to a point, or the creeps of the internet. Once you get a young people on an internet capability device, they are going to be exposed to the creeps of the world. And they can be even exposed at age 6. And it's pretty amazing. In fact, one person did a study on it where she uploaded a picture of her daughter saying at age 6, I can't wait for my friend's party tonight, birthday party, to go to it. And it was just posted out there on an Instagram site with her picture smiling. And within 24 hours, she had gotten 17 very inappropriate comments back, many of them by males, asking to see more of her, asking if her mother allows her to date, all sorts of things. And the creeps of the world have a major control of the internet. And they also have a major control of the 10 technology companies that control it. And so then their brains can go into very dark places that are very premature, and then it can get to the point where life isn't even worth living anymore. Major longitudinal study has been done on the lives of more than 1 million young people by University of California, San Diego. Teens who spent large amounts of time glued to phone and computer screens are markedly what? Less happy than those who prefer real-world activities and interactions. Social media, texting, video chatting, multi-platform video games, all associated with what? Decreased happiness. This data is very clear. But the child thinks that if you're taking these things away from him or her, that they are going to have a markedly decreased happiness versus using them. And somehow we get the idea that that might be true too. Oh, we don't want to hurt their feelings. Youth who invested more time in non-screen activities such as playing sports, reading newspapers instead of on-screen news, engaging in what type of interactions? Face-to-face social interactions were significantly happier. In fact, studies have shown that social media makes us antisocial. Now, of course, we first get onto social media, and our kids get attracted to it because they can connect. But studies show that they don't connect for very long. They soon begin to compare. And, you know, even the Bible told us comparing ourselves among ourselves is not wise. And so why do they start feeling bad? Well, this friend of theirs posted a picture up there. And what they don't realize is that friend had 1,000 different pictures taken of them from different angles and different lighting and different fake smiles and different all those things, and finally found a picture that looked least like them and then posted it up on the internet. And the other person says, I'll never be able to measure up. In fact, I'm not even sure I want to be seen in public, because I think people will judge me negatively just by looking at me in public, in comparison with these beautiful friends of mine that are posting these pictures that look so much better. By the way, speaking of images, there's a photography class from a very good photographer who knows photography very well at Weimar University. And he will tell the students that every lens, no matter how good it is, will distort versus the genuine in reality. In fact, some people look better distorted than they do in genuine views. What do we call those people? We call them photogenic. They tend to be Hollywood stars and models. If you were to see some of these Hollywood stars and models, they wouldn't look very different from any of you in this room. But with distorted lenses, they can look better. There's a reason why God himself did not want to be worshiped through images. Because images distort. And what the studies are clearly showing is the more we look at images, the less happy we become. And social media is all about images. If I want to find images of yourself, I'm probably going to be able to find them somewhere on social media. And so we're an image-driven society, and God warned us against that. He not only wants to be worshiped for who he actually is and genuine, but he wants us to be genuine and transparent. And if we're following his laws, there's no reason in the world why we can't be genuine and transparent. And genuine and transparent people are normally very well liked compared to people who are not genuine and transparent. By the way, in regards to this social media issue, I can give you an example too, even in adults. Right before the pandemic, I was in New Zealand lecturing in the North Island, and before I needed a lecture in the South Island, we had a couple of days of being able to see the sights of New Zealand. And if any of you have ever, it should be on your bucket list, New Zealand is one of the most beautiful places in all of the world, both the North and particularly the South Island. But I'd heard about this place in the South Island called Milford Sound, and we went over there in a little airplane and landed at this airstrip. And then we got out on this fjord in this, coming in from the ocean, miles away from where the ocean is, but there's a fjord in there with 5,000-foot cliffs in a rainforest with waterfalls coming down thousands of feet. And as we're out there in this boat, dolphins begin to leap in front of us and begin to interact with us. Talk about dopamine levels in the brain. My dopamine levels were coming up to very nice and high. But before they got nice and high, they started to go down. And there were two ladies in the front of this tour boat that were arguing with each other. They were upset. They obviously knew each other before they got on that boat, but they were very upset, and their voices were being raised. And I'm thinking, here we are in the middle of this beautiful scenery. You can't take this up at another time. And then the boat starts coming close to one of these big waterfalls, and it starts to slow down, and they recognize, okay, the boat's slowing down, and I guess there's something happening. And then they see the waterfall, and then they actually put their arms around each other. They smile real big. They take this picture, they load it up to their Instagram account, and then they resume their argument. Now, when they loaded it up to their Instagram account, I'm sure their friends all got jealous and thought, here I am working away, slaving away. Look at where those two ladies are at. They're having such a great time. Poor me. But yet, if they would have seen what happened 2 seconds before that picture was taken and 2 seconds after, they would have not been jealous at all. And they would have said, what in the world? You're down there in this beautiful place and you guys can't even get along on a boat? And so, we know media is a very false world. It appears genuine, but it's only what people want you to think about them that they're putting up there. But yet our young people think it's all genuine. And so when they start comparing themselves among themselves, what a problem it causes. Notice this: life satisfaction, self-worth, and happiness of young people in the U.S. plummeted after what year? 2012, the year when the proportion of Americans owning a smartphone rose by over 50%. When we look at happiness, the happiest teenagers are those who use digital media less than what? 1 hour per day. After a daily hour of screen time, levels of unhappiness rise steadily. So it's very linear. As soon as you get to over an hour, it's going to be less and less happy. And of course, time spent with media devices cannot be regained. There's a lot of wasted time that happens with all of these distractions. The typical young person is on a device or a screen hours. Almost the lowest that you can find among any group is about 3 hours of young people, and many of them are on 7, 8 hours a day on their devices. They keep us from doing healthy activities, spending time with our families, engaging in productive work. In fact, studies now show that by the time a person graduates from high school, they will have spent more time with their devices than they have with their parents. And they will actually prefer their devices over their parents because their devices are smart. They'll ask their device what the population is of Cicero. And they'll ask their mom and dad that, and mom and dad won't know. But Siri will know and come out with an answer right away. And you can ask Siri about this, and you can ask Siri about that. And then since Siri's so smart, you can also ask, I have some masculine traits, even though I appear to be a female. Let me ask Siri about if I have these masculine traits, what I actually am. and Siri will start the process. And then they'll take them right into TikTok. And then they'll start going from here to there. And then when mom and dad see what's going on with this young person and the way they're thinking, they try to help them correct those thoughts. But Siri knows a lot more than mom and dad. And poor mom and dad, they're just too ignorant to know that I'm actually a boy. I am not a girl. And so it goes on. And of course, at the very least, as mentioned, that we learn more from their parents. By the way, speaking of this, I had to go to the emergency room the other day. I work 3 days in the hospital to keep my ICU skills up. I'm an internal medicine doctor as well. I've done a lot of ICU work. So it'll be 3 consecutive days to alleviate one of our local hospitalists' time, because they're too busy and they can't find enough ICU doctors to run things. So they'd like me to work a lot more than that, but I only give them 3 days a month. But I had to go down to see a young child that needed to be admitted to the ICU, and she had jumped out of a moving vehicle to try to end her life in response to her mother grabbing her smartphone away from her while they were driving. We have young people come to our program. The first lecture that we give everyone that comes to our program is about technology. Why do we give them as their first lecture? Because we're about to take all their devices away from them. And they need to know why. They need to know why. And they need to realize this is for their own good. They have 10 days to optimize their brains. And they might miss pearls because they're being distracted right when the best information is being given that's personal for them, and they're going to miss it because someone might have Snapchatted them or whatever. And also we talk about how happiness is linked to less usage. But we've had many of our young people say, I'd rather not eat for 10 days than to give up my devices for 10 days. In fact, this is how I treat my anxiety. When I get anxious, I have to go online. And you're taking away my only form of treatment. Now, in 10 days, when they're significantly better, you'll see the results this afternoon. It's phenomenal what happens in regards to emotional health and emotional intelligence within 10 days. But in 10 days, we have to remind them, you got better without any devices. You got better. In fact, they start having real social interactions that are kind of amazing. What happens is they actually get quite close to the other people in their group, and they start to know them. They know their character traits. They know all of these things. They know the staff members, all of that. They start to actually have a close-knit aspect in the group that families would be envious of, because there's been no devices among anyone in those groups. By the way, when we go over to the director's house for a social event, the director of our program, Linda, she has a basket when you walk in the door, whether you're an adult or not an adult, and those devices go in that basket. And she says, I know you might have to get it out at some point, but just know the first one who gets their device out does the dishes after the event. Now, it's not just our children that are utilizing these devices. Our children come home from school, and the parents are on the devices. And when the parents are on the devices, what do you think the children do? They go to their devices. And of course, their ability to get hooked is even more. So Daniel Goleman, one of the promoters of the phrase emotional intelligence. In fact, he brought it into the modern world. The phrase emotional intelligence, we could get into the history of it, but it was all the way back in 1934 is when it came out. But Daniel Goleman wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence in 1990, and that book went everywhere, and it became more of a household term. But he's also written another book called focus, the hidden driver of excellence. And he says one of the keys to success is a digital Sabbath. How often? Every day. Now, we think of a Sabbath once a week. He says we need a digital Sabbath. Everyone does. Every day when adults and kids are not being distracted by devices. During that time, engage in focused learning or healthy activities. There's a child and adolescent psychiatrist in Los Angeles. Her name is Victoria Dunkley. She's written a book called Reset Your Brain. And she will not diagnose anyone with depression, anxiety, behavioral problems, ADHD. She won't diagnose that in anyone until they've given up their devices for 6 weeks. And she'll actually write electronic fast for 6 weeks. And they'll say, well, how am I going to be able to do this in school? And she'll write a note to the teacher. This person has a disability and cannot be online. You have to assign them real books. You have to assign them real papers to write. You have to assign them all of this because of their disability, and they have to follow that in the school system. And she finds out that the vast majority of what was thought to be depression, anxiety, ADHD, or behavioral problems resolve within 6 weeks. In other words, it wasn't a primary mental illness. Now, she says if there is a mental illness after that, we'll diagnose that. But ADHD in particular, if we use our devices the way our technology companies want us to use it, it will drive everybody into ADHD. And so it's just going to do that. So what we teach them in our program is we not only take their devices away, but about halfway through, we teach them what's going to happen at the end of your 6 weeks. They'll have already done a week and a half. Not everyone has to do the 6 weeks, but we find out whether they're addicted. And what % of our young people do you think are actually addicted to their devices? Yeah, it's in excess of 80% now. And it's getting higher because the engineers really try very hard to get our young people addicted. They're out there knowing what can bring about the addiction and all of those sorts of things. And so after the 6 weeks, we have them go back. We had a young person, he's 19, and he had attempted to end his life. He had some challenges growing up in a home that was not necessarily the best. And he learned about this when he came, and it was very important for him. He went through the 6-week e-fast, and he came back a year later. He was at our Emotional Intelligence Summit. This young man is mentally healthy. He's now thriving academically and also in work. He's sought after by everybody as far as his hard work ethic now, and his pay is going up. And he's just got a smile on his face, very engaging young man. And I said, you know, you weren't at all like this when you came here, and you were addicted to YouTube. He says, do you want to see what happens when I go to YouTube now? I said, yeah. So he typed it in while I was interviewing him, YouTube. YouTube blocked, not available. And so we teach them how to actually, in fact, there needs to be another accountability person. The accountability person becomes the parent, and you can turn any modern technology device into a phone that prevents them from getting anywhere on the internet where they're going to waste their time or get distracted. He's turned out all the push notifications, the text notifications, these news notifications. He does his emails all at one time every day and gets it done, and not having all of this distracting element. And one of our participants was a physician from Utah who is in charge of a whole youth group of thousands of Latter-day Saints. And he invited him. He says, you have to come to the next youth rally because this is a problem everywhere. So after that e-fast, spend less than an hour a day on device outside of work and not within an hour of going to bed. When we use that device within going to bed, we end up with that light aspect that delays our circadian rhythm, our melatonin production. But of course, this isn't the only reason. Developmental hits, adverse childhood experiences at an all-time high. We talked about physical, emotional, sexual abuse being at an all-time high. And neglect is also at an all-time high. In fact, when you're on your device extensively and it's time for you to be spending time with your kids or your grandkids, that's neglect. And physical and emotional neglect will produce consequences. Household dysfunction is also higher. Mental illness, divorce, substance use, violence against mother, incarceration of a relative or caregiver are at an all-time high. The Harvard Mastery of Stress study showed 91% chance you will have a significant disease by age 50 if you don't have a good relationship with your mother or father growing up. 91%. If you have a good relationship with one but not the other, 50% chance you'll have a serious disease by the time you're 50. If you have a good relationship with both, only 25% chance. 75% chance you'll still be very physically, mentally healthy, etc. By the way, we should have known about that before Harvard published it. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy what? Days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. There have been studies done of children of loving authoritative fathers. Now, often when the marriage is split up, they might have time with their father, but their father's trying to compete with mom to be popular, and so the father will take them to movies and give them gifts and things like that, but they no longer become authoritative. And it's not only loving fathers, it's authoritative fathers, ones that are going to keep their kids accountable, that produce the greatest benefit. If you have had a loving, authoritative father in your background, you have a higher chance of being an A student. You will have a higher IQ, better problem solvers, more likely to enjoy school and be engaged, higher economic and educational achievement. You'll be better able to handle strange situations. You'll be more resilient in handling stress, more curious in exploring, and you will have less depression. And you will also have improved life satisfaction. Studies show you're also more likely to succeed in work. You're going to be more dependable. You're going to be more trusting. You're going to be friendlier, more mentally healthy, more socially accepted, more popular, and more pro-social sibling interactions just by having a loving, authoritative father. You'll also have higher conformity to rules. You'll have long-term successful marriages and more long-term close friends. You'll have higher empathy for others, not less empathy, higher empathy. You'll have higher moral values. And notice this data, 80% less likely to ever go to jail. 75% less likely to have become an unwed parent just by having a loving, authoritative father. And you'll have better physical health. Now, having a loving, authoritative mother also is very healthy. It's not that I'm saying that this is more important than having a good mother, but we often emphasize in our society and very de-emphasize the role of a loving, authoritative father. So what are behaviors that can improve the emotional intelligence of our children? Physical exercise is one of those. As I mentioned yesterday, it's better for our brain than our body. It actually improves our neurotransmitter receptors as well as our production and release. One of the reasons why it does that is exercise helps with insulin sensitivity, and you actually get more of the raw nutrients crossing the blood-brain barrier when you have insulin sensitivity, such as tryptophan and tyrosine, which turn into 3 different important neurotransmitters. Cognitive function goes up, mood goes up, memory also goes up. Diet is also important. A junk food diet is linked to a lower ability to learn, retain, and apply knowledge. This was a study of over 4,000 kids in elementary school and pre-elementary school, and it controlled for known factors that affect IQ. And the 20% with the highest processed diet, higher in fats and sugar, had a 5-point lower IQ. That's a half a standard deviation, compared with the 20% who ate a more health-conscious diet with the most fruits, vegetables, salad, pasta, and rice. In fact, you're in the top 1% of the diet. As far as being plant-based, it was a 15-point advantage. Interestingly, there's also been a link the other way. If you have a high IQ as a child, you're more likely to become a plant-based eater after you grow up. Study of more than 8,000 men and women aged 30 whose IQs were measured when they were 10 showed the higher the IQ, the greater the odds of becoming a vegetarian. For each 15-point rise in IQ scores in the studies, the likelihood of becoming a vegetarian rose by 38%, and this was even after adjusting to factors such as social class and education. The link was still consistent. Now, this was published by the British Medical Journal, and of course they asked the question, why is this the case? And one of the answers that came out is, what's the definition of IQ? It's your ability to learn, retain, and apply knowledge. And if you have a high IQ at age 10, you're more likely to learn about the advantages of a plant-based diet. You're more likely to retain that information, and you're more likely to do what? Apply it. So sometimes if people notice that you're choosing a plant-based diet and they might ask you why, if you don't have a lot of time, you can just answer back, high IQ. Actually, that would show low emotional intelligence, so don't be tempted by that. So can we teach the ABCs of cognitive behavioral therapy in our young people? And the answer is yes. It's not just the activating event that produces the emotional consequences, it's the thoughts behind it. So the Pacific Judicial Council, this is a group of judges and federal judges, heard about the Emotional Intelligence Summit at Weimar University that we hold every year. By the way, all of you are invited to that summit. It's during spring break, mid-March. I think it'll be like March 15 through 18, this next one. And we have speakers from all over the world. We always have a new theme. And it's continuing medical education. If you're a physician or a nurse or a psychologist, or if you're just a layperson and would like to attend, you'll actually get it for cheaper because you don't have to pay for the CME aspect of things. But there were some individuals from Guam who were very much connected to government who had been attending this yearly seminar, and they found out about all the issues in Guam and the Pacific Islands. Guam is a U.S. territory, like Puerto Rico is. And they were finding out about the family violence, the incarceration, all the issues. And this person very close to government, who actually used to be the main news anchor there at Guam, stated the solution to this is actually pretty simple. It's enhancing the emotional intelligence of our children. Well, who would be able to help us with that? And so she pointed them to our organization. So Chief Judge Frances Gatewood contacted me. She's a presidential appointee. She's also very close friends with a couple of Supreme Court justices at our U.S. Supreme Court. And she invited me to speak to the educators, legislatures, and executive and judicial branches of the government of Guam. So the head of the Supreme Court there, among those islands in Guam, was there. We actually ran it also in her federal court. The federal court closed down for a week so they could have this summit. And since they're federal judges, they're under the Ninth Circuit. As you know, there's different circuits there. And the Ninth Circuit is kind of the largest circuit. It's California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Arizona, Hawaii. And so that's the federal system over all of those areas. And it's based not too far away from us in San Francisco. And they asked us to develop a curriculum for the K through 12 age group. Now, before they asked us this, they asked me two questions. They said, we see your religious background, and we also see you're president of Weimar University. So they said, are you paid at all by the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Any of your wages come from the Seventh-day Adventist Church? And I said, no. They said, is Weimar University under the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Do they subsidize Weimar University, or do they have anything to do as far as managing Weimar University. And I said, no, it's an independent entity. We are totally supportive of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We make that clear in our documents, but we have no legal or financial ties. And they said, with those two questions being answered that way, we can hire you to do this job. And so sometimes we wonder why they're self-supporting organizations. Sometimes we get answered, why don't you just merge with Pacific Union College? What are you out there having a university for? And it turns out the president of Loma Linda or PUC or anyone else that works for a church organization would have never been able to write this curriculum because of the separation of church and state that is put into our constitutional documents. So we got a group of 10 people, including some young educators, and there's even one student who's no longer a student. She actually graduated from our program, but she was brilliant. She took Optimize Your Brain from me at Weimar University. All of our four-year students have to take a class called Optimize Your Brain. By the way, we have found out as a result of that class, we give them an emotional intelligence test beforehand, and our Weimar students have significantly higher emotional intelligence than other universities. We've actually had that class also at other universities. I won't name the ones that are there, but our students in our selection process chooses a pretty high group of people that are able to manage their emotions and are able to have those skills of emotional intelligence. But what we found out is within one semester, their emotional intelligence goes up significantly even more. They end up in the top of the nation of emotional intelligence after taking this course. So as an education student, she had taken this course, and she had learned about brain health, and she was teaching second graders. And so she decided to teach the second graders in our Weimar Elementary School about their frontal lobes, about their amygdalas, about all these things in regards to brain health, and then have them do things that we had them do in our classes to improve their emotional intelligence, including playing in the dirt, agriculture types of things, exercise, different mental exercises to help. And we had parents moving to Weimar just so their kids could go to our second grade school there. And then we had others doing it for other grades. And so we used a team of individuals. And we found out emotional intelligence can be learned in pre-K through grade 12, just like math and social studies can be learned. And of course, our goal was to make it comprehensive, interesting, interactive, and engaging. So this EQ curriculum was piloted in grades 2, 5, and 9 in the Guam and 10 different islands around, because it wasn't only the judges in Guam. The judges came over from other islands around there, Chuuk, Ponape, Palau, all these different islands where they've all had issues with the court system in regards to having to lock people up even in juveniles and things like that. We divided into 4 units. Unit 1 is brain anatomy and physiology. So we teach even first graders and second graders. They'll have actually little crafts where they cut out the aspect and be able to put it on a on a board and be able to explain it. And of course, the parents were also, they did outreach, so they called all the public school parents and brought them together and saying, your students have been selected to be part of this pilot program, and we want you to understand what it is. So the parents would be on board. And one of the parents came after the second week and said, I kind of lost my temper at home. And my second grader says, Dad, I think that's your amygdala overriding your frontal lobe. And he didn't even know what the terms were. But he started to look them up, and he realized, wow, my kid is learning some pretty neat stuff. Unit 2 is comprehensive brain health. So we talk about diet, we talk about exercise, we talk about agriculture, we talk about music. One of the things that happened is they found out, at the beginning of the course, they're actually playing good, healthy music. And at the beginning of the course, these kids would come up and say, "Teacher, is that music? We've never heard anything like that." And say, "Yeah, that's music." Says, "We don't have any music like that." And then about 4 or 5 weeks into the curriculum, the teacher quit playing that at the beginning, and the kids complained and said, "Teacher, we like that music. It's helping our brains. Keep playing that music." Then Unit 3 is all about emotional intelligence. And then Unit 4, this was a 10-week, one-quarter system, recognizing and correcting what we call in the kids' vernacular, thinking errors. A thinking error is a cognitive distortion, is what we would call it in cognitive behavioral therapy. And then we did these little tests that they wanted us to do since it was a pilot program. How important is it to prioritize the health of your brain? In many of these islands, it wasn't a priority at all. These kids would say it's not a priority. But at the end of the course, they thought it was a high priority to get their brain healthy. Many of the teachers, in fact, all the teachers came. I actually came to this reporting conference. It was last December. And I was listening to the teachers who had learned how to teach this course. Elizabeth and some of our other teachers were on the line with them quite a bit and to help them to know how to teach this course. But they said, we've been teaching here for 15, 20 years, and prior to teaching this class, I never had students upset that a class was ending. But they said at the end of the class, "Teacher, it's ending already? What are we going to be learning about tomorrow in this class?" And they said they never were asked, even at math. If some kid liked math, they never asked, "So what are we going to learn about tomorrow in math?" But they had a high degree of engagement and interest. One of the teachers, male teacher, who was teaching middle school, 5th grade, said, "Learning to teach this course actually has saved my own marriage." He said, "I had significant marital issues, and I thought this wasn't going to work out. And by learning about emotional intelligence, I learned that my marital problems were due to my own lack of emotional intelligence." So he said, "I started incorporating these things myself, and my marriage is saved." Now, these are mostly Catholic countries and Catholic islands. But one of the teachers in the elementary school said, "I realized after teaching this course that what I was teaching is more important than religion." She says, "Let me explain. Religion teaches us what we must do before we die to go to heaven. But this course teaches us how we can have heaven on earth right now." And she said young people aren't interested necessarily because they don't think they're going to die anytime soon about issues of salvation, but they are interested in issues of emotional and health. So they're excited about the changes they were seeing in their own children. They noticed their children were now helping them with work at their own home, which they never volunteered for before. And their children were expressing gratitude to them, which they weren't used to. And they were better at controlling their emotions. One of the young females, she was high school age, 9th grade. Significant behavioral problems. She had been kicked out of 2 public high schools. This was the last one to deal with her. And she was now in this emotional intelligence course. And it was recess, and one of the girls was very mean to this girl and hit her and knocked her down. And now the girl's getting up, and she was known to be a fighter. That's how she got kicked out of the other 2 schools, is that she was a fighter, and she would fight until they were injured. And she got up after being knocked down by this girl, and she walked away. And the teacher said, "What happened?" "I was just shocked. You just walked away." She said, "It's that EQ class." So there were statistics. We can show them here. I don't think we have time for it yet. You can notice this was Guam and Coast Ray combined. If you strongly agree with question number 3, I think it's important to take care of my brain. You can see the before and after. The blue is after. Strongly agree only about 20%. Now it's close to 70%, and somewhat agree is also high, so it puts it up to over 80%. And no one disagreed with that, where there was a lot of kids that actually disagreed that it was even important to take care of their brain health. Carbolito Elementary, that's the name of the Supreme Court justice. He had an elementary school named after him. I need to take care of my brain. You can see that one elementary school, significant difference. I don't enjoy life. The never, in other words, I do enjoy life, was just 8 out of this one class, and then it went to 12 afterwards. And no one said that they always didn't enjoy life anymore, where there were people that are young children that stated that. Do you sleep and eat meals on a regular schedule at approximately the same times every day? Even though they're kids and they're not necessarily in control of their own meals, only 1/3 ate at regularly scheduled times before. And 10 weeks after, it was now 2/3 that were eating at regularly scheduled times. Do you regularly examine your tangled thoughts? We teach them tangled thoughts. By the way, there is a book that we use as our textbook over there. It was put into the Guam vernacular, but you have the American version. It's at the ABC. It's called Millie and Her Tangled Thoughts. And we actually show this to adults that have trouble understanding cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's a great little book, and you'll find it over there in the ABC. But notice the big difference, again, where the vast majority are now regularly examining their thoughts to see if they're tangled. When someone hurts me, I want to get even. The blue and the yellow are those that want to get even, and the red is ones who don't want to get even, and you can see how the red went up significantly, saying even if I get hurt, I don't want to get even. And one of those girls was the ones I just told you about. When I have a major personal problem, I cannot think about anything else. And the disagree point was only 1/3 that said that they could still think about other things. But now the vast majority of kids, even though they have a major personal problem, are able to think about other things. I find it very hard to forgive someone who has done something wrong to me. You can see the agree portion as far as hard to forgive, and you can see how much better it was afterwards. I panic when I have to face someone who is angry. The disagree part is in red, and you notice now the minority of people would say they didn't panic when they had to face someone angry, but now the majority are not panicking at all, even though they're facing an angry person. If things don't go right, I try to be positive about the situation, and you can see the agreement went up significantly pre and post. This was the Chuk group. I think it's important to take care of my brain. This group was actually higher, 52%. Chuk is the most primitive of the islands. There's no cars there at all. You only get from one island to another by boat. An elementary school is in one island, a public high school is in another island, and it's all by boat. But you can see post, 85% of them want to take care of their brain. I get upset when I don't get my way. Pre, 60% of the kids said they get upset when they don't get their way, and now it's only 32% in just 10 weeks. When I've gotten so angry, I've become physically violent, hitting people or breaking things. Almost half of the young people on these islands said that they did that when they got angry, 42%. But notice it dropped to 14% afterwards. And then regularly examining the tangled thoughts in Chuk, it was 23% at the beginning, 82% at the end in just 10 weeks. Sleeping regularly, you can see how that's gone up as well. And so bored with life, 15% of them were significantly bored with life before the program, only 4% afterwards. Again, forgiveness levels went up. They liked the applications and the crafts. They enjoyed the gratitude exercises. They started to like the healthy music. They were physically exercising more. They were eating healthier. They enjoyed actually analyzing their thoughts for distortion, and they found it their ability to manage their emotions with less anger and better behaviors went up in just 10 weeks. So after this, they asked us to develop a pre-K to grade 12 curriculum for every year. in the public school system, not just grades 2, 5, and 9. And so we're furiously working on that, our team, and we're hoping to have this ready to roll out in August. So, you know, I've often wondered about this statement. This is one of the reasons why we know Christ isn't coming tomorrow. He's coming soon, but not tomorrow. One of the predictions that needs to be filled is this: we shall see the medical missionary work broadening and deepening at every point of its progress because of the inflowing of hundreds and thousands of streams until the whole earth is covered as the waters cover the sea. God has made it clear that Christ is not coming back until his people do the threefold ministry, which is teaching, healing, and proclaiming. But I often wondered, how is that going to go forward? But now it's mandated in the public schools of these 10 Pacific Islands, the teaching of what we call New Star. The final T isn't there, but what I noticed at this reporting conference, even though the final T wasn't there, just doing the New Star opened up the whole spirituality of the room. That woman, after she talked about this is more important than religion, Francis Gatewood got up there and says, I know I'm not supposed to say this because this is government and it's public systems, but I pray before every judgment I make. And I want to have that connection. We didn't even say anything about the spiritual, but just lightening up the room with a New Star opened the hearts of the spiritual, and then others started to testify. And it was like I was attending an ASI evangelism report when I was listening to this. But medical missionary work, we're told, is the right hand that opened doors for the gospel message. And then Ellen White says this: the light God has given on health reform is for what? Our salvation and the salvation of the world. God's threefold ministry is always connected with issues of salvation. Sorry, I went about 7 minutes over. I probably told too many stories. But may God bless us and bless our children. We can turn this country around. Amen. If we focus in on the emotional health of grades K through 12, and now there are tools to be able to accomplish that right in our school systems. Amen. God bless you. Yes.
Should I not feel guilty about every single time I am answering to my emails or texts?
Well,
Repent.
I have to answer emails and texts too, but I don't do it. I'll tell you, there was a college president that came through our program there in California recently. He was in his 60s. He was seen as a very popular college president, and one of the reasons why he was popular is he always answered his faculty and staff quickly when they emailed him or texted him, but it ruined his mental health. And at that first lecture, the lights went on, and he said, I've ruined my mental health over being continually distracted to answer my staff and faculty. And I said, you should actually only do those emails once a day. And if it's important for them, what I've noticed for my own staff and faculty, if it's very important, they know where I'm at, and they can find me. But they don't get by with just a little chintzy text and send me and expect me to drop what I'm doing and answer that. I'm only going to answer that one time a day, and I'll knock it all out. I'll do the emails once a day, and I might not even do it at the same time. I might do an email in the evening and knock it all out, or morning, and then the next day it's in the evening. They know they're not going to get an answer necessarily right away. But we have to preserve our own mental health and quit allowing this distraction element. And so we can use it smartly. There is a book that tells you how to do this. It's written by Cal Newport. He's a computer programmer, but he's highly successful because he didn't allow his brain to be deteriorated by these devices, and it's called Digital Minimalism. How can you live your life digitally minimal? I'm not asking you to live it without any digital part. That's not so practical, but we can be digital minimalist. And he actually says we ought to do it the way the Amish decide whether technology comes into their society. They look at it and say, is this going to take away time from my family, from other pursuits or whatever? If it isn't, it's not worth it. If it's not, then we can allow this to happen. And he said, we need to do that with every one of our apps. Is this taking time away from me that's wasting time? You don't want to waste any time whatsoever. And if it's going to be wasting any time, don't have that app available. And so that means you don't have to delete your GPS app. I haven't seen anyone waste time with their GPS app. You don't have to necessarily delete your calculator. People don't stay hours on there testing the calculator out and seeing how well it works. But there are things like YouTube that may need to go away. It may be social media accounts. It may be a number of other things as well that'll need to go away. And as far as the ministry aspect of things, yes, we can still reach people through technology and use social media to reach them. I can tell you, we have social media sites, but I myself don't know how to get on any one of them. I haven't been on Facebook. I haven't been on Instagram. I have other people do that sort of thing, but I don't even know how to get on there. If someone tells me, hey, did you see what someone's doing on social media? I said, someone else will have to show me how to do that. I don't know how to even get on there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neil Nedley. Thank you.